All right, guys, if you wouldn't mind grabbing your seats, we are about ready to get started. Well, first, I just wanted to say thanks so much for coming out. I see some familiar faces, some non-familiar faces. Those are awesome as well. And leading into this week, a lot of people were asking me, where did this come from? And selfishly, it was because I wanted it. I love customer and client showcases and everybody raising tons of money. But what I also wanted us to talk about was what's not going so hot. We can definitely fill in this front row as well. Johnny, I see you climbing over there. There we go. So what I really want to talk about is the process of running a startup. It's tough. You fail all the time. I have 2 startups right now, so me and failure are best friends. We hang out like every day. And what I really want to just be honest, want to be authentic, and what I really love is the community here at mHUB, because for a long time I was always putting on a front of that things are going great, we're crushing it, we're killing it. And it wasn't until I really started being vulnerable with a lot of the people on stage, with the community, where I was like, hey, I'm going through a tough time. It's not always easy. It's not always sunshine and rainbows. So what I really love about this place as well is that we can facilitate those conversations. So when I say selfishly I wanted this, it's because I don't think that many people in the community, especially the entrepreneurial community, are talking about what to do on a bad day, an off day. When things aren't going well, what do you do? How do you push through that? How do you stay motivated? One of my favorite recent memories was we were pitching a client, and they had said to me, well, we want to go with you because you really want it. And I said to him, I was like, you're damn right I do. And the reason I did was because that was a terrible money day for me. My dog had like a $3,000 vet bill. There were so many things going on. So I was there for a 5th meeting because I needed it. And if you asked me to tell that story a year ago, I would have been too proud and boastful to ever say that that was happening. Anyways, tonight is an amazing night. I'm super excited. Not only mHUB's hosting it, but to share it with these panelists as well. Really, we're just going to be talking about work-life balance, how to make startups real, and how to make them successful. We couldn't do it without mHUB. I'll pass it to Shivani for a quick second so she can tell you a little bit about how amazing this space is.
All right, how's everyone doing tonight? Okay, that was pretty lackluster. How's everyone doing tonight? It's more like it. Well, hopefully, this panel will teach you guys a little bit more about how to balance that work and life that we all kind of strive to do. Kind of show of hands, can I just see how many people have been to mHUB before? All right, newbies. A few of you, that's awesome. Welcome. So for those of you that don't know, mHUB is an innovation center. So what we do here is that we create the conditions specifically for product innovation to thrive. Our goal is to help people turn their ideas into prototypes, prototypes into products, and eventually turn those products into sustainable businesses. And so we help our startups and our entrepreneurs kind of each step of the way. We currently have about over, I think it's like 530 members, 300 member companies, 1,200 users. And so with stats like that, it's hard to remember that mHUB itself is a startup. We've only been around for about a year and a half. So growing really fast and definitely learning a lot in this process. We have 10 manufacturing labs. Maybe you'll get to see during the networking portion of this evening. If Matt or any other staff members would like to take you guys on tours, feel free to take advantage of that. Otherwise, welcome again to our space. Happy to have you all and enjoy this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivani. All right, so if you look at the beautifully designed little cards on your seat, you'll kind of get a good feeling about what their companies are. But I'll kick it to them real fast. Whoever wants to go first. Peter, you have the mic, so I'll give it to you. A quick introduction of who you are and kind of what your company does.
Hey everybody, my name is Peter Piekarczyk, and I helped start a company called Draftbit, and we make building mobile apps really easy for developers.
So I'm Sascha Dhanjal, and I basically have a company that designs and supplies the bulk liquid industry. So the way that you can go into Whole Foods or Fresh Time or other co-ops and fill up your own like nuts or flour or rice, and you're charged by the weight. I do that for the liquids industry. So it's like extra virgin olive oil, vinegars, maple syrups, honey, stuff like that.
I'm Matt Lowe. I am founder of ChipBot. I help automate customer support using crowdsourced information.
I'm Amy Rosenow, and I'm going to tell you like a little bit more about my backdrop, as well as what I do, because I think it'll provide context for the discussion. So, I was the chief operating officer of a hedge fund here in town for a decade and change, and worked on a bunch of Wall Street jobs before that. And I had this epiphany that it was almost as hard being chief operating officer of my household with my 2 kids, husband who is an actual brain surgeon, and my job. So that it was almost as hard to be CEO of our household as it was to be CEO of this billion-dollar investment firm. And I looked to software like any rational person would to like try to make it easier, and basically had this feeling of like, this software sucks. I could build better software. And then next crazy thing I knew, I had quit my job and I was building said software, notwithstanding that I don't know how to code. So my company is called Jugl, and we are building software to make it easier to be a working parent, which means that I am crazy passionate about this topic, both because it is important to the success of my company, but also I am passionate to the point of obsession about also building a company that embraces and has like in its DNA this idea that juggling your life outside of the office and your life inside of the office is an important thing and a valuable thing, and should be not just tolerated but actively encouraged.
Awesome. Yeah, I met Amy the night she was pitching at 1871, and the tagline is awesome, which is, "The juggle is real." And my sister had, I love it. And my sister just had her first kid. I think she may have announced that the second one was coming. And so I immediately took a photo of the stage, sent it to her, and went up to her afterwards, and I was like, this is awesome. So in terms of the agenda for tonight, guys, I'm going to ask a handful of questions here. Really, we're going to start so you can kind of get to know them, and then we'll stop it towards the end. So it's not only how they became an entrepreneur, what their mindset was like transitioning out of the corporate world into that, and then beyond, how do they deal with failure? How do they push through and make successful companies like we see today? And then at that point, we'll kick it back to you guys. We'll ask, what do you have questions for? What are you curious of? And that way, hopefully, it can provide some good context. Sound like a good plan? Like Shivani, we gave you free booze for a reason. Sound like a good plan? There we go. All right. I'll start off with Peter. Now, your entrepreneurial journey started, this was not typical, right? This is not high school, college, 2 internships. How did you get started in being an entrepreneur?
Well, I opened up a PayPal account under my dad's name. Fun fact, it's still under my dad's name. I started building websites when I was 10 or 11 years old, logos and websites. And I would just open up Photoshop and try to create just something, anything, and I had a nickname back then, and I would just write it out and then just let's see if I can transform this, make this look cooler, whatever. And eventually I'm I'm pretty good at this. Can I make money off of it?
And what age is this?
10 or 11,
Nice.
I think.
Okay.
And I would list logos for $75 and websites for $300. The business wasn't sustainable because a lot of my customers wanted to jump on the phone, and you can't really fake a deep voice too well as an 11-year-old. So especially when they'd ask "Oh, where'd you go to school?" "Oh, Emerson Middle School." So that's sort of where things started. And then I actually took a break in college from the technical side for whatever reason. When I first started this website stuff, the web was pretty simple. I used Dreamweaver and Flash and Photoshop, and things were really, really easy. And there was computer science, and then there was art. And I'm well, I don't really want to do computer science, and I don't really want to do art. So I took my parents' advice and did political science so I could be a lawyer. that's something that I was never going to be good at. But still, I was like, well, this is my thing now, so I'm just gonna like act and talk like a lawyer, which also didn't work out. In college, I met a group of friends who were really into putting on shows. So I was like, oh wow, like putting on shows, like that's a really cool like endeavor to do, and like I didn't really come from a rich family, but a lot of my peers at U of I did. So I was like, let's see if I can make some money off these folks. And so we would plan, like there was a spring break trip coming up. So what did I do? I would plan the spring break trip so I could go for free, and party with the rest of my friends. We ended up bringing down Big Sean, which was a really cool experience. Wiz Khalifa, Currency, and Leaders. It was I was like, I can't believe I did this. But, like once you break down these big tasks into really small ones, like things get a lot easier to manage. It's like, oh, well, I'd never think like I could, bring somebody like Big Sean into town, right? It's like, well, what's step one? Like contacting his agent, like step 2, getting the money, like step 3, getting the venue, right? And like here we are, like hanging out with Big Sean, right? So, and it's also worth noting that Big Sean wasn't as big as he is today, right? So he was still like on the cheaper end,
Little
and
Sean.
like, huh?
I said little Sean.
He was he was little Sean back then.
Awesome.
How's that?
And Sascha, the next question I have for you is like, so Peter started super young. You did not, or not saying that, but like you had a successful career.
I wasn't as cool as Peter when I was.
I know, right? You were working for the UN, you were traveling the world, you had all these things. When you decided to break from all that and start your own company, like who did you tell? And like what was the reaction from them when you were like, oh, I'm gonna actually venture on my own and do something totally different?
Yeah, so actually I was working in kind of the humanitarian world, and working with the UN was like very bureaucratic, and so I kind of got turned off by that. But when I decided to start my own company, it actually came from my family background. My parents are both from East Africa, and our families have like had really small like businesses for generations. So it's kind of in my blood, I would say. And like everything from like the stuff that Peter was talking about, like how do I even go about starting a company, to even like after the company's been started and you have all these fires to put out, those are the people that I turn to. It's like my mom and dad, because they've had like their entire staff walk out on them, or they've had people steal like $10,000, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's part of running a business. So every time I have one of these like catastrophes, first I would call my parents, but now I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I've seen like my family struggle with this, and this is just part of life, so that's kind of helped with those failures, I guess.
And when you first told them you were doing this, were they supportive? Were they angry? Was it a mix? Like, what were their thoughts?
I mean, super supportive, yeah. So I think even like when I have doubted myself, like I've always been able to turn to them. And so I think having a really strong network of like mentors, and also like close family and friends that you can talk to when like you're at your lowest, especially as a sole founder. If you have a partner, it's a little bit different. It's really tough like on you emotionally to start a company by yourself and deal with all that. So, yeah.
Totally. And going to Amy, now for your leap, like you mentioned earlier, into entrepreneurship, I had to imagine in the corporate world, like work-life balance, especially at like what you mentioned, your personal life is like 3rd, 4th, or 5th in the priority line, right? Like nobody cares about your personal life. You have to get the job done. I imagine there was at least like one defining moment of, I need to put my family first, I'm putting my foot down, something to that. Like what really kicked you off into this?
So my defining moment was literally like a moment, which was one of my responsibilities at the fund was basically running marketing. And so we were raising money, and we had this investor coming in from New York for due diligence that was really definitely serious about investing in us. And this was like, I don't even know, like the 10th meeting or something. and I had put aside like 3 hours for this meeting. It's a whole team from New York, and the meeting's going great. We hit the 3-hour mark. We hit the 4-hour mark, and I'm like, oh my God, it is my daughter's birthday at school, and I am supposed to be there for like the last like 10 minutes of the school day. So there's no like, oh, I'll just show up late. Like the last 10 minutes of the school day, she's in kindergarten. She like picked out my outfit. We had like rehearsed who was saying what part of like the book, and like, so I'm like kind of looking at my watch like, okay, if I don't leave in 1 minute, I'm gonna miss it. Like, and finally, I just stand up, push in my chair, and say, gentlemen, you are in good hands with my partners. If you have any operational follow-up, gentlemen, because of course I was the only woman in the room. If you have any information, if you need any other information on the operational front, I will follow back up with you tomorrow. But it is my daughter's birthday at school, and I'm going to go read to her class. I push in my chair, I take my stuff, and I walk out of the room, and I sprint like a crazy person downstairs, get an Uber, go to school, whatever. The next morning, I come in, and my voicemail light is lit, and I can clearly see that it's a 212 number, and I'm like, am I gonna get fired? Like, there's a shot I could get fired. I mean, like, if I blew this investment for us, like, I don't know, I'm the only partner besides the two owners. Like, I don't think they'll fire me, but like, I guess they could. So I press play on the voicemail, and it's the senior partner from the investor group, and he says, Amy, thank you so much for being honest about why you left the meeting yesterday. I love that you actually told us the truth about going to your daughter's birthday at school instead of making up some like nonsense excuse about, you know, other obligations or whatever. And he said, if we all did that, we would be so much better off. And I was like, first of all, like the mood went from like terror to elation, like all in like 10 seconds. But I was like, he's right, and I need to model that. And so from like literally that moment forward, I just owned it. And if I was like going to this, you know, do a birthday at school, I told my whole team, from the most junior assistant to my partners. When I decided one year I was going to coach her soccer team, and on Fridays I needed to leave at 4:30 to coach, I told everyone, I'm leaving at 4:30 on Fridays for soccer coaching. If you need me, just let me know in advance, and I'll get one of the other assistant coaches to cover, but otherwise, 4:30 Fridays, I'm out. And as our team grew and matured, and more people besides me, who I was the first person at the firm to have a baby, so we like made up the maternity leave policy for me, other women came to me, and men, and said, thank you so much for showing us that we could be parents and also be awesome at our jobs, and that we could be honest about what we're doing. So that was my epiphany, was, yeah, if we stop like sneaking around and acting like this is something to be ashamed of, like everybody wins.
Definitely stealing a few tips there, because, yeah, I had somebody get mad at me the other day. Yeah, absolutely. I had somebody get mad at me the other day for like 6 hours going by without an email response, and like how high they escalated this issue. I was just like, man, 6 hours? Like, I get it, I'm usually 5 minutes, but that's not always the case. So like, maybe I just need to tell them a little bit more.
That's key, by the way.
Yeah.
One of the fights I had with one of my old partners was we were wordsmithing an email, and he started writing, sorry for the delay in responding. And I was like, you got that email 2 hours ago. We're not sorry for the delay I'm responding in things that were sent 2 hours ago, unless like something is legitimately an emergency, which this is not. And if you start telling people sorry for the delay for 2 hours, like, it's making us all into crazy people.
Grabbing my notebook. Awesome. Going on to Matt now. So you were a consultant, which like is already no work-life balance. And then you started not one, but many startups after that. I feel like I'm a friend of yours. I know you have friends. How did you maintain any kind of personal life while creating all these startups? Like, did you have to tell your friends ahead of time, or like, how did you handle that transition, and how do you manage to have even a social life transitioning to that?
Well, to be honest, I burned out right in the beginning, right? If you get a good deal, right, whether it's like that consulting gig, right when the rubber hits the road and you really need that consulting gig, right, you sprint. Or maybe it's like a great like new investor that you're trying to close. You sprint towards it. Then right at the end, you sort of burn out. That was, when I was first starting this journey, going from consulting to startups, that's what I did. And once I burnt out, I think the first thing I did was try to be aware of it. A lot of people burn out and thinking, oh, you're not hustling enough, right? How many times have you ever heard it's like you always got to grind all the time? I think it's very toxic. I think for me, I sort of just took a step back and it was like, let me just take a break. Take 24 hours. For me at the time, it was playing a lot of Destiny. I was a big gamer. and just did that for one day. Next morning, I woke up late. I was missing out, I was meetings, I talked with people, I was late. But I woke up and I felt like really energized. And that was a time when I realized, I need to build breaks into my days. And since then, I sort of treat, not Monday to Friday, I sort of treat just like, do I feel like today, do I feel like working or not? And that's how I manage work-life balance. So there's no such thing as Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. There's no such thing as Saturday and Sundays or weekends. I make up my weekends, and they're different. Right now, maybe my weekend's going to be Friday and Saturday, but then next week, I don't have a weekend. But then the week after that, I have a 5-day week off. So that's how I sort of pivoted and sort of came up with this unique strategy of like, how can I still hang out with my friends and still be A+ at my job?
Yeah, Matt has a great blog post where I can't remember the context of it, but he was like, I'm stuck. So when I do that, I just go and stare at the lake. And nothing against Matt's photography skills, but it's a tall photo, which like I hate as a photographer. Like just turn your camera sideways, but it's like a shot of the lake, and it's so personal because I'm like, that's his spot, that's his seat, that's his lake, Lake Michigan. But it was so real to me because I was like, I need more of that. Like where, I don't know, I would hit a wall of some kind, and then it was like, he helped me a lot of like, what's my lake? Where am I going to then find it there?
I was also going to say that I have a spot down the street from Matt's lake spot that I that I also go and ponder at. So we get pretty territorial,
It's a great lake, by the way.
Yeah.
I love a lake spot.
Yeah.
You can apply online.
Awesome. All right, on to Sascha. So I think one thing that you and I have talked a little bit about as well is like being realistic with yourself. Like you set outrageous goals of how successful you want to be, but then understanding like at what sacrifice, at what cost. What does that mean today? Like how do you approach that, or what are your thoughts on that?
So, have any of you guys heard of the 4 burners theory? Raise your hand. No one's heard of it? Okay, it's by this guy, David Sedaris, and basically this theory says that you have like a 4-burner stove. One burner represents like family, friends, health, and work. And if you want to be super successful, you can only have 2 of those burners like on at a time. And if you want to be like pretty successful, you might be able to have like 3 on. But whether or not you take that like super literally, you have to make compromises. And so at different points or different stages, I feel like there were some times, especially like early on, where I didn't have as much to do in my business, where I got to focus a lot on friends and like my social life. And then there have been times where I like do neglect my family, or I don't work out, or I'm not able to eat healthy. And I mean, instead of fighting it, you kind of have to like accept that you can't have like everything all at once. The other thing too that I wanted to add to kind of what they were talking about earlier is I think in American culture, maybe other cultures as well, but in the entrepreneurial world, we really take like pride in how hard we work. And like even like consultants in the corporate world do the same thing, where they're like, I didn't get to do anything this weekend. I was at the office till like midnight, and it's almost like a badge of honor. And I think that's something that like they were saying too, like we have to change that culture. Like we need to start encouraging a better work-life balance. And even when we see people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk who are like, hey, if everyone else is working 40 hours a week and you work 80 hours a week, you're going to be like that much more successful. But like Matt said, you're also going to burn out like real quick. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was like as I was preparing for this, like one thing I noticed about myself is, so I work here at mHUB, and all the time I'll be here late or on the weekends, and when you see somebody here at like you're leaving at 10 o'clock, and I don't have a 24-hour badge, so I need to be out by 10. But I see others who are still here, and I used to be like, nice, good job, stay all night, grind. Now I like tap them on the back, and I'm like, hey, don't stay here too late. Like I don't know, at least for me, I do my best work in the morning. So when I see people here staying late, I'm like, that's crap work anyway. Just get it in the morning. I digress from that, but moving on to another piece, I'll talk to Peter on this one. So understanding like success, where you want to go, and whatever may be off in the distance. I'm sure with Draftbit or anything else, you have big, lofty goals. How do you stay focused and present in the now? Like, how do you stay motivated to a small win when it's only like a small piece of the puzzle for, I'm sure, whatever you're setting off to accomplish?
I mean, it's really hard to stay motivated. You know, like, let's be honest, like, especially if the development cycle's a lot longer. So we're building a platform to make it easy for mobile developers to build apps faster, right? For us to be the people to do that, we have to know what we're doing, and we have to do things right? You're like, building mobile apps is hard, right? Like, we make a lot of mistakes. If you're going to use a tool, you have to make sure that you're building the right tool, and that tool, you know, is a level above anything else you'd ever use, right? Like, otherwise, there's like no point in paying for something that you can just do on your own. So to build that tool takes a lot of time and energy, and the best way to sort of stay motivated is by building little tools, right? Or little wins that get you excited. So recently we built something called Personas, which is a non-related product that has nothing to do with building apps and everything to do with generating like little like cartoon characters of yourself, right? So in our journey of making app development easier, I've been researching like a new programming language to make that job easier for me. And we decided to put together this like face builder. They're called personas, right? So in like the marketing world, personas are, you know, like different buckets of people that may go through your funnel, right? You know, like young, old, college, career-driven, enterprise, startup, right? Just different buckets of people. And so we just built a cartoon generator for these different things, you know, just like put it up on Product Hunt, put it up on Hacker News, right? Like got to the front page of Product Hunt and almost to the front page of Hacker News, not there entirely, but it was exciting nonetheless, you know, and like this like stupid tool, you know, like it's like, why did we even do this? You know, it's like, well, you know, like it feels stupid, but at the same time, like I managed to figure out what I needed to figure out for this language. We got a lot of attention when it comes to Draftbit, right? We said personas by Draftbit, and that led to way more people than we thought going to our website, right? So, and we have these like every few months we say, hey, why don't we just like take a break for a few weeks? Because in the grand scheme of things, a few weeks is nothing, right? Like, if you think about what it takes to build and sell a successful company, or just build one, it's like a 10-year overnight success, right? You know, like realistically, you'll be working 5 to 7 years. So a few weeks here and there just to sort of reboot is like totally worth it, right? Like otherwise, you're gonna drive yourself crazy.
And how did like the other team members at Draftbit, like when you got some quick wins or some notoriety, like how did they all feel?
They all felt great, you know, like it was just like yeah, like why not? You know, like we got our name on the board, right? Like, you know, now people at least know a little bit about us, right? And when it comes to like other things that we don't release, right? Like even internally, you know, it's like, why don't we just try to build this one feature for ourselves as the people dog fooding the app, right? Like, why don't we just spend like 2 days and just like, who cares if nobody else will use this, you know, but we will, right? And like, and being able to use your own tool, right, whatever you're working on is a big deal, right? And then being able to build in features that are immediately useful is like another great win, right? Because it's like, wow, like, I can't believe we just did that. Like, it used to take us weeks to do this by hand, right? And we took 2 days, you know, like all hands on deck. We built this one tiny tool that has like cut our like development times down for apps from like months to weeks, right? Like, because of just automating this process. So it's like little wins here or there. You know, they're always going to be little wins. They're never going to be big wins. You're never going to go from, you know, black to white. You're never going to go from 0 to 100. There's 99 numbers in between, right, that you have to hit, whether you want to think about it that way or not.
Love it. And to Amy, there's like, if you Google work-life balance, you'll find like healthy employees, a productive one, or just like random jargon like that. How do you think companies today need to emphasize and focus on work-life balance or those quick wins or things to that nature?
I mean, the way I like to think about it is that, first of all, it's like in the eye of the employee. So for me right now, it's this working mom juggle. For older employees than me, it could be taking care of ailing parents. It could be like you have a pet that you want to do, or you are running a marathon. Like, from my perspective as an employer, like, it's not my business. I want to be supportive of whatever my employees are doing outside of work that makes them happy, that makes their life fulfilling, that makes them like actually want to wake up in the morning. Because if the only reason why you're waking up in the morning is for your job, like, respectfully, you're not doing this right. So, like, we only have so much time on this earth. I want happy, fully engaged in their lives employees, whatever that means to them. So, like, that's step one, is recognizing that it's not all about work. And then, to me, it's creating space for that and knowing, like, there's not enough time in any one day for my life, or I think anyone's life, to be fully in balance every day. So I try to sort of take a step back. And so if like my whole week feels out of balance, I'm like sort of taking note. If a month feels completely out of balance, now I'm really alarmed. And if like at the end of a quarter you feel like you were totally off balance, like, to me that needs to be addressed. But like a 24-hour period is, to me, not the right like measurement for it. Because like, yeah, some days like I don't see my kids and I'm just doing work, but that doesn't mean that like I don't love them, I don't want to spend time with them. Like, they sort of get it, and I try to like live that transparently to them. So to me, those are the two keys, is like knowing that everyone's got their own version of this, and whatever it is, if you embrace it in the long term, you get more loyal employees, you get happier employees, and you get people who like share more of themselves at work, which is just win, 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 win.
Can I add to that?
Go for it.
Yeah. So in case you guys can't tell, I'm pregnant. And so when I found out, full disclosure, I like started crying because I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was going to run a company and also have a baby. So then I started talking to like other couples or like entrepreneurs, both female and male, like how they balanced everything. And they were like, well, we actually had a nanny that came in to our work with us, and we had like a separate room for them. So I'm doing a build out right now in my warehouse, and we're actually building like a little tiny like nursery play area where like the nanny and the baby can like have their own space. So I think just like thinking outside the box. And then also I started reading about all these companies, including Patagonia, which is like very famous for doing this, where you can, like, each employee, men and women, can bring their kids to work with them. And there's like a daycare center, so like on their lunch breaks, they can go have lunch with their baby. And so I just think that more companies need to think like that. Yvon Chouinard, I think is his name, he studied like internationally how to run companies. So he looked at Japan, he looked at Scandinavia, and there's so much more than just the way we do things here right now.
That's like the coolest thing that I've ever heard. So now that I'm getting a little older, like I just got engaged, and I've always had this like irrational thought, like, oh, like I'm gonna get married, I'm gonna have a kid, and like so much for building companies, right? And it's always been so irrational. Like I know it's not gonna be the case, and like every day goes by where I'm like, okay, I totally figure this out, right? But like I always thought this was like a ticking time bomb, But then I hear stories like that, and I'm like, wow, like I could probably make this work. You know what I mean? Like I could probably make this work. So it's always exciting to hear like some like new thing, or like how valuable work-life balance is, and how much of an impact it'll have on like the next like future 30, 40 years, and how that's all going to change as we get older.
And I think one thing you said really good, and now like transitioning into like the business mind of it, you said like thinking outside the box. And it's like everybody here is like working with or affiliated with a startup of some kind, I imagine. Like creativity is your differentiator. If you're going against a tech giant, and I'm passing this to Matt here in a second, you can't win where they are. Like how are you going to compete with them if they have more money, more resources, more brand recognition, whatever? So my question to you being like, how important is not only like work-life balance and thinking outside the box to creativity, but like how can startups use that as their differentiator for it?
Well, like one of the first things to think about is when you think about getting your first customer, your first 10 customers, your first 50, you're sort of like doing either guerrilla marketing or you're really like hustling with sales. You're being really creative, right? To some, that's called growth hacking. You do the same thing with work-life balance. Peter's way of doing work-life balance might be like walk every so often, but that may not work for me. You sort of have to hack your way through of figuring out what makes you reset for the day, and what makes you reset for the week, what makes you reset for the month, what makes you able to say like, hey, if you're really like working hard for 6 months, and you sort of see it, like there's a burnout eventually happen. That's like a great opportunity. It's like, what can I do to prevent this? It's sort of like when you're thinking about how do I get 10 customers, you're doing everything. That's sort of like how I be creative with burnout. It's like, I'm about to see it. All right, what are some ways to do it? Maybe even the previous ways that I've mitigated burnout won't work in the future. Maybe it's because of my role as CEO, or maybe it's because of other circumstances. Maybe it's family, right? I'm not as further as long as you are, but I'm going to have to worry about as, getting engaged and starting a family. So the circumstances of me trying to figure out work-life balance is going to change over time. So it's all about growth hacking in that sense. One really good example would be right now, I play Fortnite from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And then I wake up at, I wake up at, 8 a.m. for meetings. That's not like a lot of sleep. I'm on the iPad too. I'm watching like crazy, stupid videos at night. And that's my way of like really relaxing. It's like I get to zone out. I get to do some crazy things in a game, and I get to learn really stupid things on YouTube. And then the next morning, I'm figuring out how to get customers. The next morning, I'm about to raise money. The next morning, I'm solving my next fire. And that's sort of how it works.
Speaking of...
Do you want to hear what my timing sounds like as a comparison to that?
Go for it.
Just by way of total contrast. I wake up every morning at 5. I work out. My kids get up around 6:15, and we are like out the door. The whole crew,
caravan.
The whole crew is out the door by like 7:10 at the latest. So just so you see what like comes at you later when you've like lost control over what time you have to leave the house.
And a quick follow-up to the Fortnite comment as well, of like finding your first customer. You played Fortnite with one of your first customers, didn't? Like, how did that even happen?
So this is really funny. So in the pool of my first 10 customers, 3 of them play Fortnite. And after they were customers, I invited them to play. What's your Epic ID? We go on Fortnite. We're playing Fortnite, right? We're talking trash to each other, and then we'll be
These
waiting.
are your customers.
These are my customers. And then we'll be waiting, and it's like, hey Matt, I have this idea of like how to improve your conversions, or we'll talk about like, hey Matt, I'm trying to do this like thing. It's breaking on me. Can you fix it right now? It's like I'm playing Fortnite.
Yeah.
So like we have these. So it's really funny. Some of my customers, they do customer support over video games.
Love it. And of finding your first customer, I think the one thing everybody falls short of is like getting feedback, hitting the streets. In Sascha's case, like literally, I'm sure. Like, how important do you think that is to just talk to your customers in the early stage, or how did you even find your first couple of customers when you were starting off?
Yeah, so you like my analogy of walking the streets, which is what I call what I was doing when I first started. So I moved in with my parents when I first started my company, and I would basically walk. My parents are they live in Indianapolis, so I would basically walk into restaurants with a suitcase full of oils and vinegars, and get kicked out by the hostess. And so then I started going in through the alley directly to the kitchen.
Totally safe.
Totally safe, yeah. But the chef would always talk to you because the chefs are always really interested in new products and buying stuff as close to the farms as possible. And so that's kind of how I started. But I also got I got kicked out, and it's embarrassing over and over and over again. And those are the things that a lot of people don't really talk about, is that there's a lot of humility in entrepreneurship.
And Peter, I think being humble is very important, right? Why Combinator? I think when we first met, there may have even been a different company name at some point. What was your experience there, and how did you kind of take feedback from customers or people, and then take it to the next level or incorporate it from there?
Yeah, so Y Combinator was a very real experience. The first day that we were there, we had a very serious presentation. Do not celebrate. You haven't achieved anything. Go home and build your company. And they ended this wonderful program with take a look around. See everybody in this room. 80% of you will be out of business by next year. And they're like, thank you. That's how the program went, just to give you an idea. And it's very fast paced. And one of the most valuable things that I sort of reinforced to myself is failing fast, realizing that you're not building the right thing. If your co-founders aren't using it, if your early customers aren't using it, if you don't want to use it, maybe it's not the right thing, right? And in the moment, you feel like things are going well, right? In the moment, it's easy to persuade yourself otherwise. But then you take a step back and realize, oh, wow, none of us are using this. We're all caught up in building new features and new features and new features. And then you realize, none of these features matter because we don't even use them, So depending on what you're working on, you are your first best customer, right? Especially in software. I build stuff because it's something that I need and I find useful. And every sort of category is different, right? But just make sure that whoever your early customers are, you're talking to them and getting as much feedback as you can. So anyway, halfway through the program, some of my batchmates and friends were like, Peter, why aren't you working on an app building platform? Every time we meet up, you just talk about mobile apps, right? You don't sell me on the feature, you sell me on your ability to move quickly and build that feature. I don't even care, what is Orchard? Why are you even here? I'm more interested in learning on how you did this so quickly, right? So, I'd be like, yeah, thanks, I appreciate it, whatever, But then, after hearing that a few times, I went back to my co-founders, and I was like, hey, like maybe we maybe we should consider this, right? Like maybe a platform for building apps is the right move. And then you sort of go through this like existential crisis where it's just like, what am I doing? What are we doing, right? Like, are we going to fail, right? Like, we went through this whole like month of just like, we don't really know what we're doing as a company anymore, but we're just gonna ride out these like really weird feelings and hopefully land on something, you know? So like, after a few weeks of that, we just sort of like went back to the drawing board and said, hey, you know, like, we've realized that Orchard isn't the right move. We've realized that we are much more talented as engineers than we are as salespeople, right? Maybe we should harness our skills and talent and focus on something that we would use ourselves, right? So, and it takes some time to get there. You know, like these things don't happen overnight, and it's really easy to persuade yourself that what you're working on is valuable, you know, but take a step back, you know, reflect every once in a while, and you may realize that that's not the case, and that's totally okay.
And Matt, with probably the youngest company here who's building a feedback tool, how do you approach that? When people say, oh, your idea is dumb, or I want this feature, or can it do this? How do you handle what to build, or how do you approach going forward from there?
Well, first of all, I think your critics are actually your best point of value, right? They're the ones who are going to actually say what everything is wrong. So, like, the first thing is, first of all, treat them, like, basically say thank you, because there's maybe your circle have all been congratulating you. Great job, you launched a company. Great job, you got your first 10 customers. Honestly, that works for your morale, but it doesn't give you real value. So every time I get a critic, I like first thank them, and second, listen really well to what they're about to say. Either you can, don't even argue with them, just have humility, be like, I think you're right, and take that feedback, absorb it. You're not going to take everything, back home. You're going to filter it based on, your own needs. But that's how I handle it, is just really accept everything. I actually want people to say my product sucks, because I want to ask them, why do you think that?
I just want to add too, it's really easy to get caught up in thinking you're building the right thing when the media picks it up, right? Like when TechCrunch wants to interview you, right? Like when like Wired hits you up, right? Like where you're like trending on Twitter, right? Like you're like, oh yeah, I'm the shit, right? But like that doesn't mean that you're building anything valuable. Press comes and goes, right? So like the way your sort of growth chart may look like when that happens is like, boom, like TechCrunch release, right? And like that'll sort of like ride up here, and then it'll just like immediately fall, right? And you're like, what happened? All these people were going to my site. Well, what happened was you provided zero value, and they left, like, despite of what you were thinking.
Yeah, and going to Amy now in terms of taking that feedback, building out a routine, planning your day. You mentioned earlier of how, to me at least, how hectic your mornings sound. Like, how do you develop a good routine? How do you figure out what's working for you? How do you figure out how to prioritize things in your day so that at the end of it, you can feel good knowing that you accomplished something strong?
Yeah, my least favorite activity is like listening to one of these podcasts or reading one of these books about no disrespect to the gentleman in the room, but it's generally, to my ears, like some millennial dude who is like, yeah, I am hustling all day long, and I wake up and I meditate, and then I have some like green tea and blah, 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 and I'm like, I want to actually reach through my earphones and punch you. So from my perspective, you got to figure out, like, everyone's wired differently, insofar as I can tell. And for me, I'm a morning person. My husband, on the other hand, is a night owl. So, like, if you said to him, like, I truly think he would rather, like, poke his eyeballs out than wake up at 5 o'clock to work out. I'm at the point, and I've been doing it for more than a decade now, where I feel slightly insane if I don't get the chance. So I wake up before everyone else because that is the no excuses time of day. Sometimes I get to go to the gym, but my husband's a surgeon, so sometimes I don't get to leave the house with little kids. So we have a treadmill in the house, we have a Peloton, and we have weights. So one way or the other, I can get any of the workouts I need to get done inside of my house at 5:15 in the morning, and any excuses are my fault, nobody else's. So that to me is a sanity preserving measure. And I like the idea of meditating, but the truth is, for me, I feel like my day gets off to the strongest start if I start off with exercise. I come up with my best ideas when I'm working out. If I'm mulling over some problem from the previous day, I never get my best ideas sitting at work. I get them 3 days later in the shower or while working out. But that's just me. So whatever your version of that is, whether it is exercise or meditating or going for a walk or some other thing that I'm not naming, just know what that is and prioritize that one thing. For me, with the life that we have, I can't prioritize a lot more than that. And then when I build out my week, I look at all of the things that are not negotiable. So meetings that I've committed to, things involving kids and pickups and work dinners or whatever that I've already said yes to. And then I sort of try to make the jigsaw puzzle around that. So I have on my to-do list for next week that I want to do this writing and goal setting exercise. So I was you know what? It's amazing. It's Thanksgiving next week, which sort of snuck up on me. So I've allocated Wednesday as a writing and reflection day. And so I've got no meetings on the calendar for Wednesday. We'll do our stand up in the morning, and then my plan is to not talk to anyone. So just being taking a step back. For me, I do it usually every Friday afternoon. I'll take time to block out the following week, and then for my family stuff, or I don't know if folks in the room do or don't have kids or might have kids, but my best tip for you on the family front is to block it out in 2-week increments. So I'll map out for the nanny and my husband, okay, what is happening next week and what is happening the following week. And the following week is usually a little fuzzy, you have some thoughts about what might happen, but the key to that is realizing, oh, Josh and I both have work dinners a week, went Thursday, not 2 days from now, but 2 weeks from Thursday. Now I can find a babysitter, I can ask someone to stay late, I can do things. Realizing that you both have work dinners 2 days before is a fire drill, and I hate preventable fire drills. So this 2-week planning thing, once you do get to the part where you have kids and you've lost control over your schedule, by which I don't mean chaos, I mean there are things in your schedule that you didn't get to choose. That has been really helpful.
No, that's awesome. And to Sascha, one thing Amy kicked on at the beginning of that is find that one thing, whatever it may be. For anybody who doesn't know, she used to be here at mHUB, got married, baby on the way, new facility, a lot of transition. What's your one thing? What do you need to have every day or whatever? What do you need to do to get in the zone and be the best you?
Yeah, so I, unlike Amy, love meditating.
I'm not down on it.
Yeah. And so I also I had a habit of kind of toward the end of the day, right around 2, I'd kind of lose focus. And so I'd always meditate around 2 or 3 for 10 minutes, and it would just help me get back on track. How many people in the audience meditate? Okay, cool. So I'm so you do as well. Good. And I would say, along with just like staying on track, I think the other thing that it helps me a lot with is just being like okay with being uncomfortable. One thing Peter mentioned was that he had like a long period where him and his whole group were like, we don't really know what we're doing here. We just have to get past this phase. And in life and in business, you'll have a lot of that where you'll just be like, this sucks. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But like mentally, you have to be able to weather that. And so, yeah, that's what I do.
Awesome. And last question, then we can get some questions from you guys as well. And you made a great point, which is community, which is like having a place to connect and so forth. So last question to Matt. And it's funny because Joe, there he is. I introduced the two of them at the beginning of this, and I was like, you two just need to meet. You need to talk right now, because he asked me a question, and like truth be told, I only had like a C+ answer. but I knew Matt had like a great one. So that's why I just like introed them real fast and stepped away and pretended like I was busy. And Matt, how important is community building in this circle in Chicago and entrepreneurship? But like, what does paying it forward mean to you especially?
Sure. I'm going to put it in the context of like sort of the work-life balance part, because I think there's a lot of perspectives. Especially if you're a solo founder, one of your biggest assets that you have to build are people around you, because you don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. When shit's about to hit the fan, who are you going to go to? If you don't know how to get your customers, who do you ask? Building your network is so important, but to really do that, you have to be not only involved in a community, but you have to be willing to host a community, host an event maybe. You have to be willing to go out there one-on-one and sort of give advice to people. No one's really going to help you if you're not going to be able to pay it forward first. So for me at least, I spend a lot of time on like Indie Hacker News comment threads. I'm on Telegram, Slack, just helping people, whether it's about engineering, marketing, running a business, or truly just like how to fail. And people appreciate that. And then when I have a problem, I can actually just ask, whether they answer or not. It's just like, hey, I'm running this issue. What are your thoughts? And I get a much more honest answer. So building communities around you and expanding your network is really valuable.
I think a key point, like starting that before there's a problem. You can't just show up and be like, oh, I have no clue what to do. Everyone's just like, oh, who are you? I don't care about you. Like being there early.
And it helps prevent burnout as well. So like I mentioned the example of when you really come into a problem. Well, there's someone else, other side of, in Silicon Valley who has this problem but doesn't have a network. They're literally going into like this downward spiral mentally. They have no support. So it's very, very beneficial for you to build your network, build it early, even if you're not even doing a business now. Like just spend the time of meeting one person every week, a new person, and it'll pay it dividends later down.
Awesome. Well, thanks guys. Can we get a quick round of applause for everybody that was up there? And I'll kick it to you guys. Chris, with an immediate question.
Sorry, I was just saying, Sascha, mHUB feels just a little bit less special now that you're in Madison, but we're just happy that you're back here, glowing and charming as always. Matt, we know who to blame when someone's building a fort and sniping us from 100.
No, it's the traps. When you trap someone in a box and you put a trap in it.
Well, you have many encasements in which you get your enemies. So yes, that is you. I'll blame them there. Second question, first question is, what time does each one of the panelists get up in the morning? That's interesting to hear. Second question, Peter, what do you feel about momentum as maybe as a possible double-edged sword?
Okay. So I wake up around like 6 or 6:30. But often I don't get out of bed until like 7 or 7:30. I think there's like a false idea that every single entrepreneur is like a morning person and starts at like 4 a.m. and just goes hard all day. But I'm not one of those people.
Matt, go for it.
So I wake up literally at 9:07, and there are like 7 alarms leading up to 9:07.
I just want you all to know that if I was not up at 9:07, I think that like EMTs might be called to my bedroom to like check out what happened. I wake up at 5 a.m. Monday through Friday, and usually at 6:15 on the weekends. It's been this way for like a long time. Yeah. I basically, when I lived in New York, my first job, or like one of the first rotations when I was at JP Morgan, I had to be in before London went to lunch. And like once you sort of like deal with that once, and you realize how, for me, I am really productive in the morning before the rest of the world is like trying to take a piece of me. So I've just sort of made it my time.
It really depends on whether I've watched like an inspirational video or The Social Network the night before. But usually, I think like 6:30, 6:45, same idea. I'll like snooze, get out of bed at 7.
And then the question is momentum as a double-edged sword. I'm sure like how to handle momentum. Like, do you relish it? I don't want to take too much out of it, but yeah, like how do you handle momentum?
I take a step back. You know, like it's really easy to get caught up in stuff, and I've just sort of learned over time not to. You know, like I also do a lot of meditating and reflecting. It's like been like life-changing, literally. You know, not to be like a cliche here or anything. Like, it for me has been super beneficial, and so like when things are going crazy, you know, that's when I like check out, and I'm like, I'm gonna think about this. You know, I won't make any decisions until I've thought about this, right? So that's been super helpful. When we were working on Orchard, I just sort of like went with like, oh yeah, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to do that, and we ended up just like spinning our wheels and getting nowhere, you know. So I've sort of learned from that mistake. Does that help?
Awesome. Any more questions from the crowd? Go for it.
So first of all, thank you guys for sharing your experiences and ideas with us tonight. My question's for Amy, and actually either of you guys can contribute to this, but you mentioned that you were actually previously working, you said you were managing a hedge fund, right? And this was before you started your company. So how exactly did you make that transition and know like, okay, this is where I want to dive in full time into this? How did that transition happen?
So I left my job at the fund after like a decade and change, and my plan, insofar as I had one, was like, if hedge fund was like here, I was going to take like a itty bitty detour. I was going to do like women in investing or impact investing, like something with like a little bit more meaning, but like that was a linear use of all of my existing skill sets and relationships. And when I had this like sort of epiphany that I talked about earlier, like the, oh my God, I could build better software, I don't know, I like became like a dog with a bone. I like couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I sat my husband down and I was like, what if instead of me making a ton of money, I took 3 years off and spent that money trying to build a startup? And to my husband's great credit, he was like, hell yeah, you should do that. Because it was really this idea that the reason why the software that was out there doesn't do what I wanted to do was because 40-something-year-old women with kids and big jobs and partners who have big jobs were like not in the room making software. So that's how it started. But I will tell you, the two biggest surprises of this adventure have been, number one, notwithstanding that I have like savings and like the money that because I've been self-funding, or at least I was until last month. I took my first external funding last month. But number one, I found it terrifying to not be making money anymore. Like full on, like irrational, like our mortgage is paid off, my husband works, we have health insurance, but like full on irrational terror about the fact that I'm not like at the moment contributing financially to our household. So that was very shocking to me, like my own emotional reaction to that. And then two, which I think my fellow panelists have alluded to and would definitely echo, is like the emotional volatility of startup life completely took me by surprise. Because I lived the rest of my life in what like I would generally describe as a state of like happy, excited. And this has been the first time ever that I've been like intraday, like sometimes in the hour, like this is the greatest thing I've ever done. This is the worst thing I've ever done. Like, why did I quit my job? We're going to be awesome. I'm going to be like the next Sheryl Sandberg. Like, you're a moron. So, there you go.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I agree. Like when you first quit your job, you know, and like I quit my job when I didn't have like a family and it was just me, you know, but like that doesn't mean that it's not like crazy, right? You know, like obviously we're all in different situations, but if you don't really have any responsibilities right now, and if you're, you know, on like I guess what I'm trying to say is like if you can take the opportunity to quit, you should just do it and just see how it feels, you know, like woo. Yeah, well, I'm glad that, you know, people agree, because it's a weird feeling. It really is. Like, holy crap, I used to make all this money and now I don't. What do I do? You know, well, you still live, right? Like, you just like, continue doing whatever you did, except you just learn not to spend, you know, all the money that you used to spend, right? You sort of learn how to budget and figure out, like, oh wow, like, you know, like, maybe I can still be a normal human being and not have, you know, not have all this money coming in, right? So give it a shot if you can.
And one thing to add on that is when you do quit, that's your first test, because literally when you run a startup, especially if you already sort of past product market fit or just about to release, that moment of when you need to decide you need to quit, which is really uncomfortable, you need to live that about 2 or 3 times throughout the day, right? When she says, like, you know, really elated here and then maybe potentially depressed down here, then back to up here, like literally that happens all the time. So quitting is like the first taste of it.
Yeah, to Peter's point, I remember there was a guy I worked with who, he wasn't like odd, but I remember he was always the guy of like, you got to cut your cable. Why are we going out for lunch? We could make sandwiches here. And forever I was like, Nick, just chill out. Like, come on, man. Let's just go grab some food or whatever, making great money. And then sure enough, as soon as the startup life kicked, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I was like, hey, Ashley, can I get your Netflix password? And they're like, I don't need any of these fancy things, and I'm bringing my lunch every day. Like, it's, I don't know, it's like humbling. It's like that, yeah, that edge of like elation and anxiety where you really just figure out, I don't know, how to prioritize what's important.
And also to that, like, you think you might hate your boss, you're probably going to hate your co-founders too. Realistically, you're going to get into fights, right? Like, and just because you fight doesn't mean that, you know, like, things aren't going to go well, right? Like, it's not about the fighting, it's about how you recover from that fight, right? So, don't...
That's true for marriage too, just so you know.
Yeah, right? So, like, it's just like relationships, right? Like, it's not always going to be, like, super happy, right? And, like, with, like, social media and, like, Instagram, like, it's really easy to get sucked into, like, wow, all these people are so fucking happy and I'm depressed, right? Like, that's not the case, and don't give in to that ever.
I think the other thought I would leave you with is, you know, or a really good sign that it's time to do this is when you think about, like, the fear and regret that you would have for failing, and compare that to the fear and regret that you would have for never having tried it at all. And that was how I knew that I needed to do this, because when I, like, imagined myself 3 years from now never having tried and thought, like, what if someone else, like, did this idea, it, like, tore at the inside of me. So
Hi. Just wanted to say thank you very much for being so candid. I think a lot of us can learn from that, so I appreciate the candor. My question is how long did it take for any one of you to kind of decouple your sense of self from your identity of your career or your job? That's something that I've kind of struggled with, and I'd be curious on your insights. Thank you.
Still ongoing. I've been doing startup. This is my 6th startup. That mentality, like, it's always a struggle. Like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it's like, it's literally, you might solve one thing and then you have another emotional toll 3 months later.
I couldn't agree more. Like, work in progress, and the, you know, the money feelings that I talked about before are, like, definitely tied up in that in a way that I had not appreciated, like that. And maybe it's like an artifact of coming out of Wall Street, where, like, the money is the scorecard, but it's uncomfortable still.
Yeah, it never ends for sure. Of course, you know, like, you look around, you know, like, and all your friends are crushing it, you know, and it's like, you know, like, I'm paying off my mortgage, you know, like, that's all I can really do, right? But then, like, it's okay, like, you think you need all these things in life, but you really don't, you know, like, it's like you might get a raise at work, right? Like, oh, like, I got an extra $10,000, but I absolutely hate my job, right? Like, 6 months later, like, guess what? You still probably absolutely hate your job. And the only thing that will make you happy is by doing something that you enjoy, right? And like sometimes that journey is a lot harder for some of us, right? And sometimes people get lucky and figure that out like early on in life, right? It's always going to be hard. I feel like it'll never end. You know, like I always feel like I'm not like doing enough, or I'm not like good enough, or I'm not making enough. But like that's just sort of a cycle, because then I remind myself that, you know, I am awesome and I am doing enough, right? And I am like I'm literally making enough to just like live a happy life. You know, like going from, you know, like a 6-figure salary to, you know, like $30,000 or whatever, like my happiness has actually increased, because now I literally think about the thing that I'm working on like day and night, and that's what keeps me going.
It's a kind of a follow-up to what you guys are talking about. We talk about community, you talk about meditation, you talk about looking at the numbers, and sometimes we all know as entrepreneurs, if you look at the numbers, it can be depressing or exciting depending on the day or the hour. But how do any of you have a person, a friend, an accountability partner, a coach, someone that knows you, that you work with personally, that can actually help you through those moments of self-doubt when you think, am I on the right track? Or even on the other end, your business starts to take off and you start seeing all these other opportunities starting to present themselves that can help you kind of stay the course here. Do any of you have anyone like that? And if so, who are they to you and how do you work with them?
Yeah, so I have a couple mentors. I have one that's specifically like in my industry, which is the food industry. And so, for example, I got a big order from like probably my biggest customer right now, and I didn't have enough money to buy the inventory for it. So my business is very different from like theirs in the software industry. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I can't say no to this buyer. And he was like, well, why don't you just break the order into two, and then show your vendors, your suppliers, the purchase order, and see if they'll give you like longer terms, so I could pay them back in a longer period of time. And so having someone that's been through all that has been super helpful. And then I also have I've got so many mentors. So yeah, and the other ones are from an accelerator that I joined recently. That's really helpful. But even just like a group that like you can meet with for coffee on like a weekly basis. There's one here in Chicago called Bootstrappers Breakfast, and that's all they do is there's like 5 of them or so. There's like 5 people who, it's sort of like a small version of, have you heard of YPO? Yeah, it's sort of like a small group like version of that, where they'll help you kind of troubleshoot your problems.
So yeah, I have like a sort of like an informal group of mentors, and it initially built out when I was raising money. And how it started is when you're raising money, you're really asking everyone, even people you may haven't talked to for 5-6 years. And what happened was, first of all, they didn't want to really put any money into me because they haven't talked to me in a while. But what happened was we started dialogue. And you know, when you raise money, you really like sort of you got to give everything out. And the nice thing is they started critiquing it over time. It's like, oh, well, this is where you need to focus on your revenue. This is where you need to focus on your growth plan. Here's where, you know, X, Y, and Z. And over time, they want to follow up. They see like, all right, I took their advice, I implemented, iterated, came back to them, it's like, I did this. What do you think? Now they're like a little bit more appreciative. They're actually willing to sort of help you out. That's how I built sort of my mentor network. Is I sort of like when I was talking about with community building, you go out, really talk to people, pay it forward first. They'll bring some information back. If you take that, implement it, and go back to them, not only do they feel appreciative, but they'll be willing to at least help you out. Like, here's where you need to go, and then the collective group of your mentors become your North Star.
So I had this idea in my mind that it would be really helpful to get a coach. So I reached out to the coach that I had worked with in my old life, and I was like, you know, I've started this company, and she was like, great, I'd love to coach you. So I was like, okay. She was like, my coaching rate's $500 an hour. I was like, I said startup. Did we not like? Do you not hear like the startup part? And so it has been interesting to like have this realization that like you actually need the support a lot more now, but you sort of don't have the resources. It's similar to Sascha. I did the Wisdom like pre-accelerator at 1871, and my cohort mates have been a good form of support, as well as like some of the folks that I met through that process. But I think the other thing, or the other tool that I have used in these like harder moments is like the sort of Simon Sinek stuff of like start with the why, but like going back to my why. Like my why on Jugl is like not to create a unicorn, make a bunch of money, whatever. My why is really like I want it to be easier to be a working parent. And in particular, I'm like super passionate about making it easier for working moms to stay in the workforce, because this inability to juggle is like the leading reason why smart, well-educated, successful women just say screw it and quit, which hurts all of us, male, female, and otherwise. So when I'm freaking out and I'm not, in a room where I'm talking to other people, I sort of go back to that, like, wait a minute, refocus. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this to make it easier to be a working mom, and I find that to be of some, like, sort of grounding and perspective, and I'm sure you guys have your own versions of that, but...
Quick story, too. I think one of my favorites was I was at a brunch where I was sitting across the table thinking about starting our agency, and I had a couple of names thrown out there, and one of them was Steel Croissant. And I thought I was like this hotshot that knew everything, and the guy across the table from me, I had no clue who he was. He was like the global brand director for Blue Cross Blue Shield. When you talk about how nerdy of a designer he is, they test color blindness on every medium of every piece of collateral they create. They do more for branding and design than I've ever imagined, and they cover the whole nation. And so I was like, yeah, this croissant thing, okay. And I just like walked away, and I was like, oh man, I feel like a total idiot. And then just by opening up to him, like a week later, and I gave him like 10 names, and a week later he was like, oh, so how's Steel Croissant doing? And I'm like, I bought the domain. And he's like, nice. And what about everything else? I was like, oh man. I was like, why is he so interested in this? I was like, well, yeah, I'm like, here's like a couple of logos I'm working on. And I was like, why'd you pick that one? He's like, that's clearly the winner. And just by being like open with him, and kind of like what Matt was saying as well, like by engaging with that community, it was interesting how much when you ask somebody for help, how vested they become in your success to like help you want to help and follow up.
And like on the inverse side, get rid of people who are haters, because they do exist, and it might be your closest friends. Like usually it is like your closest friends, maybe even family, who want to see you fail, who are jealous, right? Like, oh, you'll never do this. So if you have that sort of like, if you get a lot of that, like if you feel kind of crappy talking to your friend about like your idea or whatever, that person is not your friend. So just, I guess, like, just be okay with, like, moving on from people and finding people that will support and encourage you.
Any final questions? Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming out. This is, like, the first event. Yeah. Want to do a lot of more of these. It means like so much for me, for you guys coming out. Thank you so much. These are amazing panelists. Give it up for them one more time.